Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. Our goal in this series is to provide parish staff and volunteers and diocesan ministers the formation, training, and tools needed to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, Sister Theresa Rickard will guide us in creating a culture of witness in our parish. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. Before we begin our webinar, we'd like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenter using the question section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. I'll read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. The webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you later this week via email. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Theresa Rickard is a Dominican sister of Blauvelt, New York, a well-known retreat leader, the author of several books, and the president of Renew International. For more than 30 years, Renew International has revitalized parish life in more than 150 dioceses in the United States, touching the lives of 25 million people through its ministry services. Renew International has also reached many thousands outside the U.S., having served people in 24 countries across 6 continents and in 44 languages and dialects. Sister Terry, thank you for being with us today. I am going to go ahead and pass the presenter mode over to you. Just hit the show my screen button when it comes up.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. We can see your screen now. I'm going to go ahead and close out my webcam. I'll be listening, but they won't see me. And just going to hand it all over to you. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Erin. It's great to have this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on witnessing with all of you. So in this presentation, Tips for Cultivating a Culture of Witness, I'll talk about witnessing from a Catholic perspective, how to encourage parishioners, co-ministers to share their faith stories, both one-on-one and at church events, and some ways you can begin to start or strengthen a process of incorporating witnessing into the culture of your parish. As many of you know, our Catholic culture hasn't encouraged the sharing of faith. We tend to be rather private in our faith. We don't want to impose our beliefs on others. Many of us did not grow up talking about evangelization or witnessing. But I believe this process of changing our culture has begun around 1975 with Pope Paul VI evangelization in the modern world, reinforced by John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and of course with Pope Francis on the joy of the gospel, calling every Catholic to be a joyful witness to our faith. And I believe that now more than ever, we need to be sharing our faith with others and passing it on, particularly to our children and grandchildren. So when I talk about witnessing in a Catholic context, I think that Pope Francis sums it up for us. In a talk outside of a parish in Rome, Pope Francis said, Christian witness is done with 3 things: words, the heart, and hands. Pope Francis reveals to us a show me, don't tell me kind of witness, a kind of faith that leaks into the activities of our lives. So even though as Catholics we might not be brought up with this sense of giving witness, if you ask any of us how we came to faith, well, we'll talk about our families, maybe the prayers of our grandmothers, the witness of our parents bringing us to church on Sunday, the sisters we had, a priest in a parish, whatever it might be, women and men, a catechist who revealed God to us. And most of the time, it was certainly by the example of their lives, but also the prayers they taught us and the stories they shared with us. I love that phrase, let your faith leak into your daily life. And that phrase comes from Charles Schulz, the famous author of the comic strip Peanuts. He was a man of faith, and often what he was and what he believed leaked into his comic strips. Sharing his faith was subtle but not forced and respectful of all religious traditions. I think this is a great definition for Catholics who desire to witness to our faith. We want to let our faith leak into daily life. I know that's what I try to do, whether I'm behind a car, stopped at a red light, whether I'm in a grocery store playing golf with my family, with my congregation, is in those everyday moments to ask God for the grace to let my faith by my words and actions leak into daily life. So this is one of the comic strips by Charles Schulz. So Sally says to Linus, I would have been a good evangelist. You know, the kid who sits behind me at school, I convinced him that my religion is better than his. How'd you do that? I hit him with my lunchbox. So it's interesting what Charles Schulz, in many ways, reveals the love of God and some of the tenets of the Catholic or Christian faith, but he also critiques it, and particularly in the way Christians might proselytize. Pope Francis does the same thing. He often critiques our Catholic way of life. And one of the things he says in The Joy of the Gospel is that we have to attract people by the faith, not by proselytizing, trying to convince them or take them away from their own religious tradition, but by attraction. And isn't that what Jesus did? He attracted his disciples by attraction and called them to do the same. So I'd like to share a story. We all have many stories of faith leaking into life. I'd like to share one of those with you. A Catholic couple in New Jersey, in our area, often drive us back and forth, those of us who work at Renew and do traveling, to the airport. So Doreen, who's a woman of great faith, we often share faith in her car. So on one of those rides, a number of years ago, she shared with me about one of her daughters, and that she had fourth stage colon cancer, little children. It really looked bleak. How she was praying, obviously her mom was praying. She was asking me for prayers. And then she began to tell me the story of when her daughter had the surgery to remove the cancer. So anyway, her daughter is of course, worried, scared, mostly that she did not want to leave her children without a mom. So she's in that pre-op room, and the doctor comes over to her and begins to tell her everything's going to happen. And she just paused for a moment and she said to him, do you believe? Do you believe that God is present when you're doing surgery? Or that prayer even matters? And with that, he took one of those little gauze piece of gauze, and he writes on it, and he comes over and he hands it to her. And it was a scripture from Jeremiah 29:11. For I know well the plans I have mind for you, plans for your welfare and not for your woe, so as to give you a future full of hope. And she held on to that gauze with a new confidence, a sign from God that all would be well, no matter what, or no matter the outcome of the surgery. I was moved by that story and giving retreats, and I've written about it. I shared that story with many people, hoping that it would give them a sense of consolation and courage as they needed to face, whether it be surgery or loss of a job or anything that was happening that I thought connected to their life. Well, about 2 years after that, I was diagnosed with having stage 0 cancer, a little lesion on my right vocal cord. And I was doing okay. I was feeling pretty confident, and the doctor was confident. So there I am. You know how you're in there with some of the sisters in my congregation, one of my brothers, and we're laughing and praying and, saying, oh, well, we'll be well. So I felt pretty good. But as they took me away from them, I was on one of those metal carts. Some of you might experience that, feeling very vulnerable. And as we walked into that white operating room, my heart began to race. I thought I couldn't breathe. And as I was feeling just awful, Lord, help me. And what comes back to me is the story of that young woman preparing for surgery. And I heard the Lord whisper to me, Terry, I know well the plans I have for you, plans for your welfare and not for your woe, so as to give you a future full of hope. And I held on to that promise and just felt this peace come upon me. Well, the drugs a little later helped too, but even before that. And here I am 7 years later and sharing these points on witnessing with you. I'd like to share the name of my book is Everyday Witness, 7 Simple Habits for Sharing Your Faith. So I'm going to briefly go over them. And I think they're it's a great book to help form people who, to encourage them to witness, people who want to know how to witness, catechists, people in the pews. So I'll just go briefly over them. Choose joy, be humble, preach from the pulpit of life, pray unceasingly, listen with a cupped ear, practice the art of accompaniment, and engage in God talk. So I'll start with the first one, choose joy. Many of you are familiar with the joy of the gospel. Pope Francis said when Christians have more of a sourpuss, I love that, than a faith that communicates the joy of being loved by God, they harm the witness of the church. So we know joy is an essential spiritual practice that grows out of faith and grace, gratitude, hope, and love. It is the pure and simple delight in being alive. So again, there are many tough situations in our lives. There's many times that we feel sad, but even in the midst of that, we can choose joy, to place our hope and our trust in Christ, who gives us that source of joy. Second is be humble. Pope Francis, in an interview with the editors of Jesuit magazine, was asked a question: who is the real Jorge Bergoglio? And without a hesitation, he said, I am a sinner. And that went viral. His humanness endeared him to the world, including those of different faiths and those with no faith at all. So that sense that we're all sinners, that it's only by God's grace that we have faith, that we're saved, that we experience God's love and presence. We never want to give people the feeling we feel superior or arrogance. I was just reading an article about, what is the biggest turnoff, particularly for millennials, and this sense of arrogance. Well, honestly, it's a turnoff for any of us. So being humble means not judging others, especially young people who are not necessarily practicing the faith, but most importantly, to present yourself as someone who needs God and not somebody that has all the answers, that we're all fragile human beings, but by God's grace, we have been given this great gift of faith. The third is preach from the pulpit of life. And what I mean by that is two things. One thing, certainly, practice what you preach. People are always watching us, especially children. So by the way we treat others, works of charity, just acts, our speech, that we preach from that. But the other part of that too is that it's from the stuff of our everyday lives, the way God touches us in the simplest ways. That's what we want to share with others, give witness to, share our faith stories, these God moments that if we pause and reflect on our life, we see many of them. The smile of one of your grandchildren, a beautiful sunset, the sense of goodness that we see in people that sometimes surprises us. So we want to reflect on our life, see God in that, and to be able to share those moments and examples with others. Pray unceasingly. Never give up hope. And I would also say that if there's somebody that you're really upset about that maybe has turned away from God, maybe doesn't go to church, maybe it's one of your adult children, that start with prayer first and believe that and place that person in God's loving hands and pray for the humility, the patience, the love to share your faith when it seems most natural. So for me, instead of telling your adult children they need to go to Mass and all the things that might happen if they don't go to Mass, maybe there's a time when you can share what encountering Jesus in the Eucharist has meant to you. Maybe there's a time in your life and your family life that you were struggling, and it was by being with the faith community and receiving the word in Eucharist that really lifted you in a surprising way. How being a engaged and practicing Catholic, how has given you purpose and meaning because of who God is in your life. The fifth, listen with a cupped ear. Of anything that we hear from young people and the Synod for young people, the first thing they said is, we want people to listen to us, to hear what we're struggling with, to hear the desires and what we are seeking. So listening is the number one quality that people are looking for, particularly when they're seekers and they're looking to engage in a spiritual quest. Listening is, I love that saying, we listen with a cupped ear so we can speak with the voice of God. 6, practice the art of accompaniment. Pope Francis has often called on Christian disciples and the church itself to accompany people on their journey to a deeper experience and knowledge of God. So if you're going to engage people and share your story, you just don't leave them. You accompany them. I think of the great experiences that I had when I was working in a parish in the Bronx, and one of my pastoral responsibilities was the RCIA, accompanying those catechumens and candidates for the sacraments. So it wasn't, the core was to share faith with them, gather in small groups on the Word of God, to mentor them, to have a community to walk with them. And I felt that when we did the accompaniment right, people had a more lasting engagement with faith and the church. There was a study done out in California on passing on the faith to young people. And there's many great things about that study, but one that really struck me is that for a young person to be introduced to the faith and to continue practicing the faith, when they studied that, is they had 5 significant adults in their life that were 5 adults who accompanied them on their faith journey. And 7 engage in God talk. So what I mean by that is that to talk about gratitude and goodness and share that with others, to be able in a more natural way to talk about, listen, I'm really struggling, will you pray for me? All those kinds of ways that we can bring our spirituality in our everyday life. I go to a gym called the Max Challenge, and often at the end of our workout, the trainer gives us a little pep talk, keep us going, to eat right and keep our spirits up and keep on exercising. So one of those kind of pep talks said, what helps you or keeps you from eating too much or the wrong things? And people called out, chocolate desserts or feeling guilty about gaining weight. And someone said something about forgiveness. And that was interesting. So we talked a little bit about that somehow that when we're not able to forgive ourselves or others, how it causes us to sometimes overindulge in eating and some other things. So there I was, I got to the side and putting on my street shoes, and somebody one of my gym mates just started talking to me about forgiveness and what I thought about that and a struggle that she was having in a relationship. So I think that when we can engage in God talk, it can lead to deeper spiritual conversations. Now, some tips to creating a culture of witness in your parish. A culture where people share their faith, both one-on-one and in more public ways, in more formal ways, whether it be at a reconciliation service or a catechist sharing her faith with her students. So as you know, it is very difficult to change a culture. And I think particularly in the Catholic Church, this culture that we want our parishes to be evangelizing, that we want them to witness in both word and action, sometimes is difficult, that we really have an engaged congregation. So how do you go about changing the culture? First, that particularly witness, if that is part of the vision of the parish, to be a parish that gives a witness to the world. And that one of the values of sharing faith is part of that vision of the parish. And then, of course, in creating a culture change or a tweak in your culture takes leadership. In our case, in the church, the pastor is important. So the pastor needs to share his own story, to be able to encourage those in the parish to share their stories, whether they're in small faith sharing groups, at different events in the parish, and also to share outside, to pass on the faith. But I love that book by Chris Lowney, Everyone's a Leader. So if you are the director of religious ed or adult faith formation, you can, in the programs you give to your the parishioners in terms of your catechist, to train them in encourage them, give them the skills to share their stories. So this is a powerful way. And then you yourselves as leaders to give witness and share your faith stories openly with others. The third one is empowering the community. So often the community, if you can engage some of the parishioners who are leaders and really encourage them in this important value of sharing our stories. It's interesting, you know, with Renew, a lot of times we'll go out, we have these small group programs to help create more vibrant parish, help people to share their faith. And the pastor will say, hey, but you're only getting the people who are already in the pews. You know, it's kind of changed my thinking recently that the only way to reach out and share faith with those who are no longer going to church or engage in our communities is by the people in the pews that are the lay faithful that who come to church. We need to empower them, give them the skills and encouragement to recognize God's presence in their life, their God moments, and share them with others. Right now, and particularly because of the sexual abuse scandal, the recent study, I think it's from Gallup or Pew, 25% less of Catholics are less engaged in their parish, going to church less often, 25% less in giving to diocesan and parish collections. So we have to work with that group for healing, to empower them, that even in the midst, God is working and in their lives and helping them to pass on their faith to their children and grandchildren. Another point is igniting a movement. So sometimes when we're trying to change the culture, we think we got to change everyone. No, try to get a small group of people who see the importance of learning to share their faith with others, to have the confidence and the courage, and to do it in the right way. Do some small actions that others can see and see it being successful. And later I'll give you some best practices, some practical ideas to share your faith. So what's really key to this culture change is that you actually have opportunities for people to witness. So you to be intentional about it. So I'll just give you some very practical ways that you can do that. Certainly small groups, small faith sharing groups are opportunities for engaged disciples to gather, to articulate their faith, to talk about what's happening in their lives and how that connects to the Word of God, church teaching, and to share and act on that. So it's a school of discipleship. I think a great opportunity are sacramental preparation meetings for parents. The thing that, as we're creating a new baptism prep program, and as we gathered focus groups, the number one thing that these young families said was they found them boring. So, how do we make the faith boring? So, for me, when we can talk about our faith stories, if young couples can give testimony and witness about God is building up their families and moving them, that's when we can make those formation sessions alive. So I think it's a great opportunity to have young couples, young people, for instance, sharing about the meaning of what it meant to have this, bring this child into life, the gift, and then to why they would be bringing their children for baptism. So that's part of our new baptism prep program, that we have young people giving testimony, and we're doing that online. Sunday Mass, some best practices. In my own parish, kids came back from one of these mission trips, and very briefly after communion shared what that meant for them, how they felt like they were having faith in action. And obviously the youth minister worked with them because they were concise, they were clear and heartfelt. This past Easter vigil, a friend of mine is a prison chaplain. So I went with her to the services, and at the Easter vigil, she had a group of the women who we received into the church that were baptized. And after the sacramental celebration, a couple of them just said a few words of how they came to this kind of new transformation in Christ. It wasn't a dry eye. It was so powerful. And after that, the next couple of weeks, many of those who were in the congregation, a lot of the women that were there came forward to be part of the process of becoming a Christian, a Catholic. Youth gatherings. When I was a catechist, I remember when I was first out of college, I would share with them the story of my own conversion story, of stories of others, of different things in my life. And I felt like it was then that I had them with me. So I've continued that process. Anytime that I have opportunities to give talk, that I have that opportunity to share faith stories. Parish missions and retreats, that we have people getting up and giving testimony. Reconciliation services. I've been to parishes that they've had somebody talk about what it meant to receive sacramental reconciliation. And I think a huge way that we can all do it is through social media. We all have those smartphones, and you can just ask one question. Have young people do this of somebody, what is a turning point in your life, in the life of your faith? Or I've done it to say, ask somebody, who has been someone who's passed on the faith to you? Can you give me the name of that person, how they are related to you, and maybe one story, how that person passed on the faith to you? You can post them on your parish websites. You can send them out to everyone in the parish and use them in different events. So there's many, many ways that you can incorporate in an intentional way witnessing in your parish. And at the same time, giving people the encouragement to share their faith outside the parish grounds. So it's the training place within the parish to help people then, when they're out and about in their daily lives, to share their God moments with others. I'm just going to give you a few quick tips on helping people to share their story. Pope Francis in The Joy of the Gospel speaks about informal preaching and formal preaching. Informal, he talks about in the middle of a conversation, we share our faith. And a more formal preaching certainly would be the homily, but also for me, some parish events that people, catechetical moments, just what I talked about earlier during your formation sessions with people in the process of becoming a Catholic, maybe during the announcements at Mass. There's many ways that people can share that in a formal way at retreats and parish missions. So this is very simple. So what I ask people to do when I've worked with them is to, what is a turning point in your life? Reflect on that. Maybe consider if you were raised in the faith or not. Maybe you were raised in the faith, but you were a cultural Catholic. Maybe there's a moment or an event that really was a turning point for you. How has your faith deepened over a period of adulthood, some key moments? Maybe a time in your life that challenged your faith, or maybe you lost your faith, or had to reclaim, or conversely, a situation that strengthened or validated your faith. Or maybe there's just a simple recognition of God's personal presence in your life, and you want to share that and how that kind of came about. So I think that writing things out really helped to clarify what we're thinking. One of our series, we have a program called Be My Witness, really to change the culture of the parish in terms of witnessing, becoming more welcoming, looking at Sunday matters, mission matters. And so in part of that series, we have Witness Matters, and we have a series of witness videos. And this is really, this chart here, this is what we use to help people, everyday people, prepare to give their testimony. And I'll give you the website at the end, but they're right on the BeMyWitness.org website. You can look at these and download these witness talks. So you can use them in, they're free and different things you're doing in the parish. But I think more importantly, they can give you an example of how you can create witness videos in your parish, and to use them in many different ways, in live events, but also on the internet. Another part of best practices now, when we're talking about more formal, and is to tell people, and this is good for homilies too, tell one story, stay focused, never be the hero or heroine of the story, and share the resolution. So I can remember when I was doing youth ministry, and we'd have a Teens Encounter Christ weekend, and we were actually doing it in the parish itself. So we would have kids give testimony, but I was really worked with them, so that they would tell one story, and that they wouldn't reveal too much that they might regret later, so that they were careful. You don't have to tell all the gory details. And then I would make sure that they had resolved whatever that was, so that it doesn't become fraught with emotion. That's something that they had worked through, found a resolution, and were sharing this to help other young people get through, whether it be a breakup of a boyfriend or girlfriend, or a death of a loved one, that they be able to give them something that would give them hope and move them forward. Also to write it out, but to write it out in an oral form, so what we call an oral manuscript, to write it the way we speak, and then to practice. So I think that's so important. So sometimes people will say, listen, Sister Terry, we've tried to have people give witness, but then it goes on, or they go multiple points. Well, like anything else, this takes work. You got to work with someone, especially if they don't have the experience of speaking publicly. So to keep it very tight, we have many stories of our faith, but just to tell one, never to be the hero or heroine of that story, share the resolution, write it out, and practice. And I always say, time it. Especially today, whether it's on it live or on the internet, these YouTubes, I think they're less than a minute. It's amazing what you can say in less than a minute. But I certainly wouldn't be any more than 3 minutes. So I think that's important, keep it focused, always thinking of the other. This story, how can it bring another to faith? How can it lift them up? So I'm happy for any questions. This is the website that has those witness stories on there. I think we have 12 of them in English and Spanish. But I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sister. I'm going to go ahead and take over the presenter mode from you.
Great.
And this is the time that everyone can begin to type in their questions for Sister Terry. Thank you so much. There was a lot of real practical information here that you provided for us. I think all of us have been in settings in which people came up to witness talks, to give a witness talk, and it maybe went too long, or we couldn't quite understand the point. So I think that those best practice tips is really, really valuable. I've got a question here from Tina. What are your suggestions for how to train people in this process of witnessing? Do you have experience with having a witness training workshop within the parish?
Interesting. Yeah. Part of our Be My Witness small group program, we have some workshops there on helping them witness. But I think also if the book that was just published by Ave Maria Press, you'll see I have, it's really for a small group. So I think it would be a great training um, program for you. It has stories that I've shared. It has reflection questions, some action steps. So that I think be a good possibility also.
Okay, great. Thank you. Laura asked, what's the best way to begin with a parish that struggles to share their faith?
Well, I think small groups are the best way. Now, of course, I'm biased because that's what we do at Renew International. But any of the evangelical churches, when they talk about how to have a more vibrant group, they talk about small group ministry. So I think you could start with Lenten faith sharing or Advent, 6 weeks, and get people sharing in those small groups, and then make the connection. If you're sharing with this group of 8 to 12 people, once you become comfortable with that, that kind of helps you to move out to others.
hmm I would imagine that some people don't feel confident in sharing their faith because they feel that they have to be an expert on
Exactly.
the church's teaching, on whatever. But you never mentioned that in your entire presentation. It's more about sharing your story.
Yeah, I think that honestly, I don't know too many people that have come to faith through reading a theology book. Um, Doctrine is important, but awakening to the faith comes first. And when people have this experience, this encounter with Jesus Christ, then of course then we have a desire to grow in that, and then we talk about doctrine and beliefs and how to grow very much in practices of faith.
Mhm. Thank you. Sister Carol says, which gospel witness stories are good to share as starters for parishioners to hear and to be encouraged to share?
I think the parables are the most powerful because they're stories. That's how Jesus taught. So for me, I always start with the stories in the gospel, the
Okay.
parables.
Yes. Yes. Hannah asks, can you talk a bit more on how to witness within a set number of characters on social media?
Yeah, I mean, so you mean like tweeting a story? I, I think what you can do is you can tweet like a headline and then let it go to maybe a short blog that you share some kind of story of faith. So I use different stories in my book, but I'll give an example. I mean, it can be even a story about. I remember I was at a beach. It was a sunset, and I remember standing there, and all these people are there waiting for the sunset. Many of you probably had that experience, and it was beautiful. And then the sunset goes down, and everybody begins to clap. And I remember just having this moment of feeling, my goodness, they're clapping for God. It was such an overwhelming experience for me. Um, so it doesn't have to be something that's life altering, but it's these small moments actually that help us grow in our faith,
hmm
these everyday moments.
hmm Evelyn asks, what's the best way to share the faith with a family who will be taught as a family? So a family with children ranging in like ages from 4 to 15.
Yeah, I think stories cut across all sorts of ages. Everyone likes a story. When I was I was a couple of years out of college before I became a sister. I was part of the New York Archdiocesan mission team. And there was a priest there, James Conlon. I mean, he's profoundly affected my life and my choices to be a Dominican. But I was 20 something years old. I had no theology. Where it was sisters, priests, and lay people, particularly young ones. We had formed this mission team, and it was all through story. Everyone, the priests, and each one of us, everything we shared was through personal witness. And the churches were packed. This was in the late 80s into the 90s. Music and story. So I think that that's the way, in terms of family, to be able to share stories of faith. And
Beautiful.
ask the children to share. They have stories. They have stories of God.
So true. Um, Sister Lucy asked, does Renew suggest resources for Advent and Lent?
Yes, you can go on our website. We have Sister Donna Ciangio just wrote a new faith sharing book for us. So, and then I do the Lent series. It's called Live Lent, A, B, and C. So you can go on our website, renewintl.org, and or send me an email. And any of us will be happy to help you.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, Terry asks, how is it best to ignite interest from the pews?
You know, there are always people, I've worked in a number of parishes and work with a number of parishes that are really looking for some way to share their faith. So I think you got to get a few people that are more open to that, and start small and start sharing faith and talking to them. So I think that's the best way.
Starting small
Yeah.
groups. Okay, let's see.
I would say when people see others up there giving a testimony, then they're more confident that they can do it too. So that's the other thing. You need to actually take some action and take some small steps to get ordinary people sharing their story, maybe at a reconciliation or after communion or before Mass, something like that, particularly during Lent, maybe.
Awesome. This is not a question, but Brian Lemoy from the Diocese of St. Petersburg says, thanks to Sister Terry, my colleague Diane Kledzik and I are huge fans of yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to have a few fans, you know?
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been very, very valuable, very worthwhile. Um, and as you mentioned, a lot of this, you can build on a lot of what Sister Terry has mentioned here from in her book, Everyday Witness: 7 Simple Habits for Sharing Your Faith. And we want to offer you 20% off this today through the 1st of November. All you have to do is use webinar code or promo code webinar 22. As I mentioned before, all of our webinars are recorded. You will receive a link to the webinar recording tomorrow via email. Sister Terry, thank you again so much for spending time with us today. And for the rest of you, join us again next Tuesday. Julia Dzelski is the Assistant Director of Marriage and Family Life and Laity at the USCCB. And she's going to share how to implement Christus Vivit and Amoris Laetitia in family life and ministry. So thank you all so very much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.